phone says it's 9:30. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the jury. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for being here. I would like to acknowledge that we are within the territory of the Sechelt First Nation. This is the Infrastructure Services Committee meeting of Thursday, June the 20th. And you are called to order. First item of business is adoption of the agenda. I have a couple of minor amendments. We have a couple of items under new business. One is the PMAC, Plan Monitoring Advisory Committee, and the other one is webcams. Any other amendments to the agenda? Director Seegers.
Thank you. I don't see a new business on my agenda, so where are we going to put that?
New business should be after communications and before in camera. It fell off the template somehow. Any other amendments? Do I see a motion to adopt the amended agenda? Second, thank you. All in favor? Excellent. None opposed. So, I think the next thing we could do for efficiency is entertain a motion to receive all of the reports on our agenda. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you very much. All right, item number 2, General Manager, Infrastructure Services, Water Supply Update.
Thank you, Chair. I prepared a short presentation, so I would suggest you Thank you, Chair. Today I want to give a water supply update on where we are at the moment, and I will briefly touch on the weather forecast, talk about the Chapman Creek water system in terms of supply, demand, and outreach education, and other initiatives we're undertaking related to the Chapman system. As well, I will briefly touch on the water supply situation in the Eastbourne water system on Keats Island. So in terms of weather forecast, this is the map, the weather forecast from Environment Canada in terms of the probability of a higher than average warm summer. And you can see that the south coast of BC is 100% certainty that it will be higher than average. It's about 2 to 3 degrees, which is forecast at that moment. Weather forecast predictions for precipitation long term are way more difficult to do. However, Environment Canada indicates that it's most likely very dry as well. In terms of snowmelt, up in the Tetrahedron Park, we're still about a month ahead of where we were last year at this point in time. So how are we doing in terms of supply? Today almost all snow is melted in the upper watershed. There's a little bit left in the real higher ranges, about 20 to 30 centimeters. That's it. Chapman and Edwards Lakes are full. We last several days, the contributions from the watershed downstream of the lakes decreased a lot, and we've been relying on that release from water downstream of the watershed of the dams to meet our supply for the community and environmental flow needs. So as of today, Chesterwell will go online to augment what we divert from Chapman Creek. And this morning we were able to confirm that the valve at Chapman Lake will need to be open today, maybe tomorrow, maybe Saturday. That's currently being assessed by staff to augment the flows as well. At Chesterwell, because we can put it online today, we might be able to delay releasing water from Chapman Lake a couple of days, but it will be in the next few days. So what it means is, as of now, we are relying fully on our storage, including just our well, which is about 1 million liters a day. So how are we doing in terms of demand? So the overall objective in terms of our demand management is still that we have enough water for drinking water, firefighting, and environmental flow protection if we would not have a significant amount of rain until early October. It's an extended drought scenario that we're working with in terms of our demand and supply management. That's what we base our decision making on at the staff level. So stage 2 was announced on May 27th with an effective date of June 7th to allow the community to prepare for that, and we've seen that a lot of people in the community did so. Saw a lot of pressure washing, etc., happening that weekend. So I think people were aware of the fact that stage 2 was coming. In terms of demand, we've seen between 16.5 and 17.5 thousand liters a day used when the average temperatures were hovering between 17 and 20 degrees, which is more or less what we expected at this time of year as well, with the number of people currently on the coast. If the next step is, I got a lot of questions, when are we going to stage 3? The desired demand at the moment to ensure that we meet that objective of getting water, having enough water until the end of September, early October, is really that we would have a demand in the order of 14,000 cubic meters a day. The current demand, we've seen it going up to 18,000. So that's where we were, given the fact that we will have more people on the coast in July and August, and the average temperatures, we expect them to go up in the upcoming weeks as well. We foresee that we need to declare a stage 3 sometime in the upcoming couple of weeks, which would be early as well compared to previous years. And the reason why we do it is really to make sure that we reduce that demand to save water for late September. The reason why I'm not saying right now when we go to stage 3, because we have to see how the demand will evolve in the upcoming week. If it will come down and will stay in the order of 14, 15 because the temperatures are going down a little bit, we might be able to delay it a week later to reduce the impact to the community. Because it's really because of the short-term forecast that temperatures might go down a little bit, that we expect the demand to go down a little bit as well. And if that's the case, then we can push it off maybe for another week. So that's what we'll declare. That will determine the calling of stage 3. So what have we done in terms of outreach and education and enforcement since early June? Staff spoke to about 500 people, residents, on the phone or here at the front desk. We had our water dialogue sessions early June with about 350 residents. We had 100 residents talking to staff about water supply and drought management on other public events. We have our daily watering conservation tips on social media, and we got positive feedback on that as well. And we initiated a pledge to reduce water use in the summer in the collaboration with Central Coast Tourism for vacation accommodations, and we're soon will initiate one as well for restaurants and pubs. So it is a voluntary campaign where we ask vacation accommodations and restaurants to reduce their water, and instead they are recognized with a sticker, and we will see if we can promote them as well. Acknowledge that in a way that they're water smart. In terms of enforcement, given that we're currently in stage 2, our primary focus was the outreach and education side of the house. but we're doing our dedicated patrols with staff and SCRD staff when they are on duty and driving around and doing their work in the community. They pick up a lot of complaints and have conversations as well, and that's a huge additional resource we're currently relying on. We're responding to every outdoor water use complaint we receive, and we do site visits. We have 11 potential infractions where we issued a verbal warning, 5 written warnings, and no tickets issued yet. And we will increase our patrols if when the stage 3 will be declared. The other thing we're currently doing is our private leak resolutions. Early June, we identified in all electoral areas combined 540 leaks. 280 of those were new leaks, newly identified last 2 months. So we sent 480 letters to people, and many of those leaks we know are leaking taps, garden hoses, toilets. Not large volumes, but 41 of those leaks were over 10 cubic meters a day, and we had 6 leaks over 50 cubic meters a day. So our efforts are primarily focused on the larger leaks, and to date we received good success there. Only last several days we had 1 leak resolved, which was leaking 62 cubic meters a day. It was a broken water line. People were not aware of it. And the other one was an 18 cubic meter per day, and it was a broken valve. Also on somebody's property, and they were not aware of the fact that it was leaking. So good success there, and we're focusing really on we're actively supporting people with finding leaks if they're not able to identify it themselves, helping them through the process, because some people are not aware of the fact that they have a leak, or it's not easy to identify where it actually is on the property or how to solve it. So we're helping people where we can. Given that we're in a unique situation, given the magnitude of the drought, we're foreseeing this summer, given where we are right now and what's upcoming, we initiated some I call it special initiatives. Our current approach, how I foresee it in terms of calling the stages and the uptake from the community, is to date, I think we have enough water in the system to meet the demand until late September, early October. However, we always need to be on the cautious side. We always need to think, what if? So we're working to see what we can do to use Grey Creek earlier, more. Can we draw more water from it? As I indicated before, it's not it's a source where we have a water license for, but we don't have an appropriate water treatment system in place there. So we're working with Vancouver Coastal Health to see what we can do there. Same for Trout Lake. Trout Lake used to be a water source for the community, has not been activated in many years, and we've working on the technical side to get the back infrastructure we currently have there back up and running. That's in place right now. So we're now working with Vancouver Coastal Health as well to see what we can do there in terms of the treatment, because we don't have adequate treatment there in place as well. And we would, in both cases, Grey Creek and Trout Lake, we won't be able to add the requirement treatment within the time frame of the summer. The other one, and this is one that has been raised by members of the community as well, is can we reduce the environmental flow needs for Chapman Creek until fish start migrating up Chapman Creek, which is not until August 1st and early August. We've done homework. The environmental flow need is indeed confirmed, is set in 2016, was determined by qualified biologists to allow for fish to migrate up the stream. It was determined for a drought period in September, August, September. The current situation is that we are facing is that the environmental flow need would need to be maintained as of this weekend because the flows are currently going down. That's why we have to open the valve. So we retained the support of the same qualified professional. Again, we are working with the province to see what we need to do, how much we need to do an assessment up front and or monitoring if we were allowed to lower the environmental flow need between now and early August, sorry. We don't have any good analysis ready to support such a request, and that's a real issue because we've never looked at it from that lens, that we would have a drought right now. It was always a drought in August, September. So there are some data available, so we're currently working, what can we do with the data to support our request, and what can we do with the province, how much would they allow us to, do they take a risk as well? That's what it would be a favor if they would allow us to lower it. At the same time, we're we're working on the plan, what can we do this year in terms of monitoring and assessment so that we have a good case for future years, because it's dry now, so there might be opportunities to do creek flow monitoring now that and collect information that could support a request for a lower environmental flow need earlier in the summer for the years to come. So in all three cases, we're working on our technical logistics as well as the collaboration with VCH and Flint Road. If more details are available, I will for sure include them in future updates. This is all related to Chapman. I want to touch base briefly on our only system on one of the islands, which is Eastbourne, the Eastbourne water system on Keats Island. In the winter, it has about 50 permanent residents. In the summer, it can go up to over 200. It is fully dependent on low productive wells. So during the summer, residents are used to having 200 liters a day at any time per year, at any time throughout the summer. That's for them their normal. The aquifer that these wells are drawing from has not fully recharged from last year's drought. That's a concern for us because last year they were already, at the end of the summer, they were, it was the productivity of the wells went down significantly, so we have to make sure that they also have enough water until the end of September, early October. So we're actively monitoring the situation, and same as for the Chapman system, we are working to find alternative water sources, solutions, do the logistic, technical, and work with the agencies where needed so that we can ensure that there is enough water supply for this community until the fall rain starts again. The complicating factor here as well, that fall rains would not automatically means that the aquifer would recharge. It could take a lot longer before, if this drought persists and the aquifer would go down, it can take a lot longer before the productivity of the wells would be supportive to support a larger population. However, late in the fall, the population on the island might go down as well, so that can help us. That might help us out there. That's it for me, and I'm more than happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Is a PDF version of that perchance going to be available on the website?
Yes, we can make it for sure that that is available later today.
Okay, questions? Director.
Thank you. With regards to the environmental flow needs on Chapman, would this be a time when we would advocate with the province from this table?
They're aware of, there's of course always a time to do that. They're aware of the fact that it is a high priority for us. I spoke to some of the senior officials within the ministry. Additional awareness might help. Not sure.
So we just need names. Okay. And then I think that's it. All I've got for now. Okay. I'll come back later.
Director Beamish.
Are there plans to ask for a meeting with the Minister of Environment at UBCM this year and perhaps have a conversation around this if we haven't had further conversation before then?
I think we should put that on our list, staff.
In terms of the environmental flow needs, it's Minister of Flintboard. It's not environment. And to that, the only thing I can say there is that how the Water Sustainability Act works, the Minister is not a decision maker on any decisions on the Water Sustainability Act. He's not authorized to make any decisions on that. So a meeting with him could be useful to put pressure on the fact that a decision is being made, but it would considerably feathering of the decision maker if he would direct staff to make a decision in a certain way.
Perhaps staff could make a note and bring that forward. We're going to have a discussion about UBCM. Anyone who hasn't gone? All right, Director Seegers.
Thank you. So if it's not the minister, who is it that we would need to contact? Because that we can also set up a UBCM if we need to, because they have staff there, but also prior to that to deal with what we're dealing with now.
Therefore, there's a list of several decision makers within the ministry who could make a decision on a file like this. And they're at the staff level, and sometimes the decisions are bumped up to a higher level, sometimes not. And I'm in contact with everybody, so I can help there.
Director Beamish.
Just a note on the your presentation that you have issued warnings to people at this stage of stage 4. Do we have a zero tolerance at stage 3, where it'd be tickets and no warnings issued?
The zero tolerance will definitely be in place if we hit stage 4. Stage 3, there might be a little bit of wiggle room, but it will go down and down significantly, yes. We will go quicker to issuing tickets than issuing warnings.
Director Hiltz.
Thanks. I guess it's because this is kind of uncharted territory, and infrastructure services comes once a month is when we receive verbal updates. Is it possible that staff could do verbal updates even at the board meeting next week in order to inform the public of kind of the status? That's why I'm wondering if that's something in terms of the transparency and the outreach to receive verbal updates, because the situation could change quickly. That's what I'm wondering. And a month for the next verbal update is kind of a long time away.
What I would suggest indeed is that I add, for example, the board meetings or next committee meeting maybe in the next week or the week after, maybe PCD. I can do an update, and I can scale the extent of the update based on what's actually urgent and relevant at the point in time. Yes.
Director Theis.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure if my proposition that I have now is a little bit too high on the risk scale, but I'm wondering if considering that at night the community probably would have less water demand, and at night whatever snow melt happens tends to rush by our intake, because that's, I guess, the timing of things. Is that not correct?
There is actually, when we need our environmental flow need, it continues 200 liters a second, 24/7. There is a little bit of margin in error there, that we keep it a little bit as a reserve. But we keep it at 200 liters a second. And because there is a 12-hour delay between what's happening at the lake and at our intake, it doesn't mean that if even the current snow melt cycles, they happen 12 hours later at our intake. So there's no one-on-one connection there. And the levels at the intake are, to a large amount, also determined by how much water we're actually diverting. And at night is one of the times that we make sure that we fill up all our reservoirs so that we're ready for the early morning sprinkling.
Right. That was my question, is whether we actually draw down our reservoirs at periods of high demand. Okay, that's good. Thanks.
Director Hiltz.
The question I have is about the drought scenario that we're looking at. The water demand analysis looked at as a 160 or 180-day scenario from into the future sometime. Is that kind of the sort of scenario that we're looking at, is a 160 or 180-day drought period? Is that kind of where your mind is looking at?
I'm not sure if my mind is looking at that, but given that in May we received 25 mil rain here, where the average is 81. That's Seychelles. The water demand analysis assumed a drought from May 1st to October 31st. I'm not totally there. We're currently aiming, as I indicated, to no significant rain events. And significant, I mean not one shower, it's multiple day rain event. That's what we need, 3, 4, or 5 days. Until early October. That's why we're exploring the other options as well, Grey Creek, Trout Lake, and to how can we move that date from early October later, so that we create a buffer, more buffer for ourselves. Last year, if you put it in perspective, last year, stage 4 was called August 31st. Siphon was opened. We started using the siphon. And a week later, we had several days of rain, which, how I called it, filled up the sponge, filled up the area above the watershed, but didn't release the water yet. Then we had a mid-September second rain, several days of rain, which actually filled up the lake. Afterwards, the drought just persisted, and until in October, we had to release water from the lake again to supply the community of water. It's not that we were in any risk of scenario, so there was no stage 4 called at that point in time, but we were actively releasing water because otherwise we wouldn't be able to supply it. So those couple of days in, those 2 rain events in September were really crucial at that point in time. If we would not have had them, we would have been in similar scenarios that we're currently working from. Does that help?
So the message to the public really is, just because it's raining doesn't mean you should use more water. And a significant rainfall event is where Chapman level actually responds, rises. That's what's deemed to be a significant rainfall event.
A significant rainfall event is when the lake is actually filling up back again, yes.
Director Lamb.
I was just wondering, the salmon hatchery, are they working towards finding other sources of water, or do you know that?
What I know from the hatchery is that they moved all fish species that they had off coast. So there's currently no fish in the hatchery. They're not diverting any water at the moment. That's the latest I've heard as of yesterday. because they don't have the water rights to use the water during the summer. And so they anticipated for that they moved everything off coast. What their long-term plan is in terms of what kind of species. And I know that they were looking for alternative sources of water like wells. And I haven't connected with them recently to hear where if there was any progress there.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. I actually talked with Simon from the fish hatchery late last week, I guess, and they said all of the salmon have been moved off of the site. By July 1st, they'll have all the trout gone as well, so they will have no fish on site as of July 1st. And they are currently testing the wells. They have people there who are testing the wells right now. One or two have been tested. They have 4, so they're doing some work on that, and we'll know more probably in the next couple weeks.
Director Halls?
Could you elaborate a bit more on your plan to use Trout Lake as a water supply, and would there be a change in the public use of the lake?
Thank you. Trout Lake used to be a water source that provided water to the Half Moon Bay Seekers Cove area. When the SRD completed infrastructure upgrades that allowed more Chapman water to flow in that direction, and that included a water main along the highway instead of a water main, the water main that's still there along Red Roost. So there's now 2 ways to get water from the bottom one side of Red Roost to the other side of Red Roost. So by making that connection, actually Trout Lake became redundant because the volume we're allowed to divert from it is really low. And of course there is, given that the Drinking Water Protection Act requires us to, they added requirements in terms of filtration over time. At a certain point, the business case was not there to upgrade that system to meet the current drinking water criteria in terms of filtration. All the infrastructure we always kept there. We didn't decommission anything. So last several weeks, staff went in and tested everything. Everything is working. However, we don't have the adequate filtration. We're missing UV. And given the use of the system by residents for swimming, tourism, as well as beaver activity in the area, that is of concern, the filtration piece. So we're currently working with Vancouver Coastal Health to assess what we can do there. What would it take in terms of use of the water? When can we use it? What would be the implications for the actual use of that area by residents for recreational purposes as well? And so it's definitely not something that I can count on as we speak.
Director Ties.
That begs the question: is there such a thing as a mobile water treatment unit? And should we see if staff wants to seek out one and get some quotes?
Thank you. The SRD, as part of our emergency preparedness efforts, we have a very small unit ourselves, but it's very, very small. It's no use in providing water to a community as we're looking at right now. It would be maybe for some residents or a small neighborhood. We've looked at and we are in the process of receiving quotes from bringing in larger ones. So we're exploring those options as well. And but even there will be discussions with Vancouver Coastal Health in terms of are they adequate and how quickly can we get them here. And yes, they will be expensive.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. Given that cost, are we also looking at a UV unit for that facility?
There are, yes, we're exploring every option we can in terms of mobile treatment, additional treatment. We are full on.
Director Lamb.
I'm just wondering if there have been major leaks and major users of water in the past. Are they coming into compliance or using, do we know if they're using less water? I know the District of Sechelt was one of the major users. So
I don't have an update on today of I didn't run the data to see what the current users of the top 20 we presented earlier this year. But there has been conversations with almost all of them the last several weeks, and with some of them we're actually working. Staff are working with some of the users actually actively to find leaks and to see if we can address them, solve them.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. Given that we may need to have our chair and Remco and perhaps the biologist connect with people in Victoria if we need to move this along, I'm wondering if we want to pass a motion to provide the ability for them to do that without having to come back to the board.
What would a motion like that look like?
I don't know. That's why I'm putting it out there. Perhaps Angie could give us some guidance, or Remco?
It could be something as simple as a recommendation to authorize the chair, staff, and consultants to meet with the ministry in Victoria to advocate for necessary approvals for
environmental flow need reduction, right. Or water requirements,
or related to measures to address our water supply or initiatives to address our water supply situation.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, I'm going to ask Tracy to read that back when she's done. Here.
The Infrastructure Services Committee recommended to authorize the chair, staff, and consultants to meet with the ministry in Victoria to advocate for necessary approvals related to measures to address our water supply situation.
Do I see a seconder? We have a seconder. Any further discussion? All in favor? Great, that passes. Right, Director Paul.
Thank you. I was just going to kind of suggest something that Darnelda just motioned. So, because I was going to go back on becoming council for the Sechelt Nation, I've went and met with ministers, with former chair Gary Knorr and former chair, our director Ian McDonald there, and we've had these discussions. So I just wanted to get it progressed, and I'm glad that we can do this here, and we have done now. But Remco, the limited drawdown from Trout Lake, how would that help the rest of the coast?
If we would use our maximum volume we're allowed to use at Trout Lake, it will provide a very small amount of extra water. If you compare it to everything we need, it would provide us, now I have to do this from top of my head, that's always tricky in public, but I think it's about 3 to 4 days extra water for the community at stage 4 level. So it won't be a lot, it will be something. So we have to, one of the things in terms of bringing in mobile treatment facilities and considering the expense associated with that is the return on investment in terms of water supply. And Trout Lake might not be the highest return on investment if you compare it, for example, to Grey Creek, where we have a license to draw way more water from, and where there is more water available. So that's why we're currently primarily focused on how can we use Grey Creek more, and still advancing our discussions on Trout Lake, because 3-4 days is 3-4 days. It's something. But we have all options on the table, and we are weighing them.
Director Paul?
So, with 3 or 4 days also, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Can you come back to me?
Director Seegers?
Thank you. Given we have the other 3 governments at the table here too, perhaps when that meeting is scheduled, an invitation could be put out to the mayors and the chief of the council that if they could make the meeting in Victoria too, that they could also attend. If we have the whole coast represented, it may actually have more weight.
Good suggestion. Director Halls?
Can I just ask one more time, how would that affect public use of the lake?
That's currently being discussed with Vancouver Coast Health, but it's good.
So people could still use the lake in the community?
That's unsure at the moment. It could very well be that it would not be allowed anymore.
Because it is a main community hub, for sure, during the summer.
Director Paul?
Yeah, so if we were going to draw from Trout Lake and or Grey Creek, are these in place? I'm sorry, I don't recall the presentation off the top of my head. Would these be in place for this year, this summer? Yeah?
Yes.
A week or 2 weeks and they'll
Yeah,
be up and running? And
Yeah.
Okay.
Grey Creek, we have, in both cases, we have the infrastructure in place to draw from both, but we don't have the filtration system in place to draw from them.
Director Beamish?
Yeah, I just would second Director Seeger's motion that in the event that we're called upon, that we could all go to Victoria. We'd be prepared to do that.
Director Seegers, was that a motion?
I guess it was.
Do we know what the motion was exactly?
No?
it was for all local
Director Lamb?
governments.
We should maybe ask Nicholas Simons, our MLA, to be at that meeting also.
Okay, so I guess it's something like, should a meeting be scheduled with the appropriate individuals in Victoria, that the heads of the local governments and our MLA be invited to attend?
And you seconded it. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you. All right, do we have any further discussion on the water update? Director Seegers?
Thank you. So we've talked a lot about Trout Lake and what would need to happen there to bring that up to be able to be used. What about Grey Creek? As you mentioned, it needs treatment because it doesn't have the filtration system. So what are we looking at there?
We're looking at similar options in terms of discussion with Vancouver Coast Health. What would be the terms and conditions for using for them to authorize us to use it? What are the options for bringing in mobile treatment facilities, which would be similar, but larger, bigger scale?
Director Lamb?
Sure. So the South Pender Harbor area they seem to have sufficient water at this time. And have we looked into what the cost would be to run a pipe from their, from their lake system or from their filtration system back down to the Half Moon Bay? Because their water coming out of there would be filtered already, and it would be something that we could start on this afternoon. I don't think we would need approval from the provincial government to bring that water this way.
Several years ago, there was an assessment done, or some calculations done, what it would cost, and it would cost a significant amount of money. We're talking about 10 million something, that order of magnitude. It's primarily because of the major blasting of rock that would need to happen and associated paving. In terms of the water supply, currently at South Bend, I didn't include it in my presentation because it's not that much of concern for us at the moment. It's lower than the lakes are low because the early snow melt is also impacting them. So McNeil Lake is not overflowing at the moment, which it always did at this point in time. So it's not that it's of concern, but it is low at the moment there as well, just because of the early snow melt, warmer weather. It's not of concern, but it's lower than it used to be.
All right, have we exhausted this topic? I think we have. I think we shall move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Water Emergency Declaration. In anticipation of this, I did some wordsmithing, and I've taken the staff's suggested declaration on page 3 of our agenda and done some changes to it. Since I was the person who made the motion in the first place, I'm fine calling this a crisis rather than emergency, especially as the term emergency seems to have been recently downgraded by the federal government. So my suggestion to open it up to discussion was that in the whereas clause on page 3, that we simply simplify it to whereas the SCRD has insufficient water supply available in the Chapman system to get through a dry summer without going past stage 2 water regulations. And then keep with the next and. Therefore, be it resolved that the SCRD declare an immediate water crisis. Then I've inserted a paragraph because we didn't have anything to immediately address the current water crisis. So what I suggested was, and be it further resolved that the SCRD takes strong measures to reduce our own water usage this summer, proactively work with large water users to implement conservation measures, and step up enforcement of water restriction violations, including mandatory fines for residents who have previously received a warning. And then in the last paragraph, and be it further resolved that to address our long-term water supply situation, a water summit of community stakeholders be convened this fall to make recommendations on revisions to the drought management plan and comprehensive regional water plan. Staff, please.
Thank you. I have one. I've no comments on any of the changes except the inclusion of this fall. I know that it was discussed about to have the water summit this fall. Next week at Corporate Administrative Services Committee agenda, there will be, we're aiming to have the report there on the water dialogues that will have some suggestions, recommendations on terms of the timing and the scope of this water summit. And if all would indeed be, given the situation we're in right now, if that would indeed be the best time to have a proactive event like the water summit is intended to be. the message, I can elaborate a little bit. The thought is that the community might be in a drought situation until September. To have then in September or October an event that's forward-looking, where it's collecting ideas and moving forward. We are at staff level. We're concerned that might not be the most productive timing of such an event. So more on that will come next week. So that's my only comment with respect to these amendments. Thank you.
I would be happy to amend that to this fall or winter. I just wanted a time attached to this, not a general, sometime next year, the year after, 2030. I think fall or winter is sufficiently vague to get us there. Can I make that as a motion? Am I allowed to make a motion? I'm the chair. Oh, okay. I'm making that as a motion. Yay, I have a seconder. Further discussion. This one as presented on paper with the addition of or winter. Director Beamish.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to my earlier point, and that is that keep issuing warnings. Everybody gets a mulligan. And we don't know how many times, for example, that somebody might have violated the requirements of water restrictions before they actually got caught and issued a warning. So I would like to suggest that at stage 3 that fines be mandatory. So that the phrasing there would be that including mandatory fines after stage 3 has been put into effect, sort of thing. So that at that point in time, everybody's aware now that we have a problem. We're declaring this a crisis, but we're still giving mulligans. And I think we have to stop that.
I just want to see if there's any feedback from staff on that. Are there any considerations for bylaw?
Well, we'll have to monitor the resource implications, but the point is taken. Certainly understand that. Generally speaking, our approach for bylaw enforcement in general is voluntary compliance, and education is a part of that. I also take the point that people should be aware of the water situation at this time, and at stage 3, if that's the direction of the board, then we'll certainly follow through on that, and if it becomes a resourcing issue, then we'll address it at that time.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but I don't agree with that. For those who have water meters, that is something that they can monitor, but we still have areas in the municipality or in the district that don't have water meters. So in the report that was given this morning already, they said there were 280 new leaks. So some of those people may not know they have them. So if we come out and automatically find them and they don't even know they have a leak, I would say give them a warning, make sure they have a program in place to get it fixed ASAP. If they don't get it fixed right away, then fine them. So, but I'd like to give them the opportunity to take care of it on their own.
Staff, please.
At the staff level, there is no connection between having a leak or receiving a fine. Those two are separate things. We are using using the meters to identify leaks, and we try to resolve them. And the fines and warnings are only associated with active use of water itself, sprinkling. Active outdoor use that is regulated by the DNP. Just as a clarification. Thank you.
So I'll change my stance.
Director Halls.
Throughout Half Moon Bay, the majority of the houses now have water meters installed. Are you monitoring them regularly now to see who is actively using the most water?
Yes.
Yes. And are you talking to them? Like, are you going to them and addressing it?
Because the area, not all residents on the Chapman system currently have water meters. We don't want to get in a situation where we treat people differently with a meter or without a meter. So we use the meters, we track them, but we're not targeting them because that would be unfair treatment compared to people without a meter.
I'm just going to observe that although I get where Mayor Beamish is coming from, we do have so many summer residents that it is possible that some people still haven't noticed that we have a water crisis. So I'm okay with a warning the first time, but perhaps we should create a repeat offenders file because, there's no excuse the second time. There simply isn't. Any further discussions, motions? That one's still on the floor. So in that case, I'm going to call the motion. All in favor, please. This one. The water crisis motion. Do we have any? It wasn't seconded. So, all right. All in Director Paul? Just seconding. Okay. All right. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay. Motion passes. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. And next item is managing growth to address water supply deficit.
Thank you. So this report was first presented at the May Infrastructure Services meeting, and staff were asked to bring it back to June meeting for further consideration. The report outlines some possible approaches to manage growth in the water supply deficit, and staff are happy to answer any questions that might arise.
I actually had a question for staff, which was, did the water dialogues give you any further observations on public concerns to inform the activities on growth?
Thank you for the question. There was a significant amount of discussion related to growth at those meetings. They had a wide variety of angles to the subject. So we ourselves did not pick up, hey, that's the one that the community is looking at, other than an appetite to manage it.
Director Theis.
Okay, I've got two questions. One is staff currently in dialogue with BC Ferries around travel statistics and including the number of trips paid for with experience card and those without, as well as number of people going off the coast and on the coming onto the coast? So that's my first question.
Oh, thank you for the question. We have had contact with Central Coast Tourism, which were taking the lead on that one. I'm not sure they were in contact with BC Ferries to collect those data. I'm not sure if they also include experience cards versus non-experience card, but I can follow up there.
Director Theis.
Yeah. That's the intent of that one, is to figure out who are the locals and who are the visitors and who's coming and who's going, or at least get a little bit of an idea potentially. And then the other question is if staff has investigated the feasibility of using water meters statistics as a tool for determining seasonal occupancy and how that might relate to per capita water consumption statistics.
Thank you for the question. So far, we have not used water meters for that purpose. And I'm also I'm not sure if the data we are collecting at the moment and the way we manage and store them, if we can do that, but I can definitely look into that.
Director Seeger.
Thank you. So first of all, I think I've already mentioned at this table that the District of Sechelt received a letter from the chair of the board here with regards to approvals for subdivision, zoning, etc., with regards to water use. We have referred that to staff to look at what we can do in the District of Sechelt, and we're awaiting a report back from them. So at this table, what I've done in this report is identified the pieces that could be looked at this table that could potentially withstand legal challenge. So on page, first one, on page 7, numbers 3 and 4 with regards to zoning amendments and subdivision approval, and then also on page 9, 4 and 5 with regards to subdivision servicing. So if we're looking at doing something at this table, those are the 4 basically, subdivision and zoning, that we could weigh in on. And the reason I've highlighted those, first of all, we would more likely not be challenged legally, and all apply across the coast and aren't just SCRD specific. So would also apply for, Gibsons and Sechelt and the Sechelt Nation. So on page 9, number 4 and 5, if you look at it, talks about updating the bylaw. I mean, obviously, bylaw will take a little time to do, wouldn't actually take effect this year, but it's more long-term. Could result in additional terms and conditions to be set for applicants. So my questions around that would be, could we say have to have low flow in their house? Could we put gray water use in there? Could we put cisterns in there? Are those the kinds of things that would show up in this subdivision servicing bylaw? That would be a question for staff. And then the next one, I think, ties into that as well, with comments on the referrals that come, indicating that they need to not impact the water use excessively. So I'd be looking for staff for what kinds of things are we actually looking to address in here.
Staff, please.
Thank you for the question, Chair. In preparing the scan that's included in the report today, staff sought to be as broad as possible, and so consequently, the depth on some of these issues is not there yet. The subdivision servicing standards tend to be quite technical, and they tend to be focused on property servicing less than on how, for example, water is used, or on construction standards. Staff's initial response to the questions might be that if the committee and the board directs that there are particular water conservation strategies that are preferred, that staff could then investigate which of the tools identified on page 9, including, for example, servicing standards, would be most appropriate and bring back analysis on fit within those categories. Thank you.
I'm just going to make a comment here that we are in the middle of a big Bylaw 310 revision, and I don't think we want to tackle Bylaw 320 until we've put Bylaw 310 to bed, but Director Seegers?
Perhaps we could just have staff identify then for the zoning and the subdivision servicing which items would typically be dealt with at the regional district and which would be dealt with at the municipal level. Because if it's coming from here, then that's something we wouldn't look at municipally, but if not, then we could have our staff actually investigate those kinds of things and look at how we would incorporate them at our level. So I don't know what a motion on that would look like that would actually give you the guidance that wouldn't have you do like a ton of work, but give you a little more depth to provide us with information.
Back to staff.
Thank you. I think the motion could look like something like, and that staff report back on the scope of influence on water conservation measures that the SRD can implement in its zoning and subdivision servicing standards, bylaws,
And comments.
and province.
And comments.
Oh, yeah, and comments.
Because those comments are when the subdivisions come
Yeah,
here, right?
yeah.
Actually, I was wondering if we could deal with comments separately, because I don't think they require a big process. Am I correct there?
Thank you, Chair. Staff feel we understand the ask here. Thanks.
Director Seegers?
I'll make that motion that is on the floor.
Director Beamish?
Okay, I'm not 100% sure I know where I am or where we are. I'd just like to question on page 9, item number 5,
Okay.
resolution for comments on subdivision.
Just,
Sorry?
this is my fault here, but we have a motion. I should ask for a second before we go any further.
Could we hear the motion?
Yeah, we need to hear the motion.
Yeah.
That staff report back on the scope of influence, water conservation measures that SCRD can implement in its subdivision servicing bylaw and
Subdivision and zoning.
All right, do I hear a second for that motion? Yes, we have a second. All right, discussion.
I'm just going to ask that question again on regards to item 5, and it does talk about comments on subdivision. Subdivisions aren't referred, so that the approving officer has the right to approve a subdivision without referral to this board. And in terms of municipality, we don't refer our subdivisions outside the municipality. We may not know what's happening unless it's a very large subdivision requiring rezoning or something of that nature. So that it's a rezoning or OCP amendment that gets referred, not a subdivision itself.
Staff, please.
In terms of subdivision, we are receiving responses, referrals with respect to water from District T-Shield, and we're getting them from subdivisions in Zone 3 currently for the town of Gibsons.
Director Seegers? I just wanted to observe that in regards to this motion, a timeline would be helpful to understand not just what's implied, but how long it would take. Something that's going to take 4 years is probably not practical. I don't know if we need to amend the motion to say that, but I was going to make that comment to staff.
Thank you, Chair. As a general comment, staff would, in taking the motion as currently formed away, staff would apply the analytical lenses that are described on page 10, which does include time to develop and time to implement. Thank you.
Do we have any further discussion on this? Director Seegers?
I understand the response from staff to your question, but I don't know if it actually addressed what you were looking at. You're looking at if we pass this motion, do we need something in here, and staff can advise as to when we would expect to see a response back to this table, taking into account all of these aspects that are considered here. And it might be that they need a couple of months to do it.
That wasn't actually my question, but that's a great question. So, yes, so if we make this motion, when would we be looking at a report?
Given staff were briefly discussing this, but we will try. We are aiming to get a report back to the board prior to the Water Summit, so that that it can impact the discussions at that summit. Thank you.
I just had a follow-up question. If we were to put a warning message on all the water referrals saying, look, you guys, we don't have enough water in the summer, or whatever it said, what is the process to do that? Is there a complex process, or is that just a very simple thing that we can do?
Thank you for the question, Chair. In terms of past practice in providing reports to the committee relating to subdivision referrals or comments to the approving officer, staff have been in the practice of including a message about the importance of water conservation and recommending, so staying within the regional district's scope of influence, recommending water conservation initiatives such as xeriscaping, etc.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. I think this would be a message that would need to come much earlier in the development and zoning and building process. By the time the documents come to the regional district, it's way beyond the implementation of something like that. So I would suggest that that would be something at a municipal level or at the planning level would be put up front for those coming forward with any kind of application.
That's a really good suggestion. Is there a way of flagging water concerns early in the planning stage when developers first contact regional government?
Thank you, Chair. Staff believe that question can be addressed in the report back noted in the motion. The mechanisms for that early awareness and perhaps early regulation would include some of the bylaws noted in the scope of the report that's in front of the committee. Thank you.
Director Seegers.
Thank you, and I'll take that back to the District of Sechelt. I'm also a member of the CCBA, Coast Community Builders Association. I think that's something that we could advise them about as well. So, and I'll do that.
Director Halls.
I'm not sure if I'm in line, but my understanding that is in the past developers have donated land and money towards parks and things like that. I could be wrong, but in upcoming developments and subdivisions, what about having them donate to upgrading the water system if they want to do the subdivision?
Staff, please.
The development cost charges, which is the tool listed as number 2 on page 9, is the current tool for where developers pay into any upgrades to our water system. This is also one of the bylaws similar to 320 or 422 that could be considered for an upgrade and could be reviewed in terms of assessing how any update could increase the water conservation measures.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. So are you suggesting that we pass a recommendation that the development cost charges bylaw number 693 be looked at for including required upgrades to water supply and treatment, so that those could be DCC actionable and chargeable projects?
Staff, please.
DCCs are intended to be, for us to calculate them, they're based on our regional long-term strategic water plan. So in terms of timing of updating the DCC bylaw, we suggest to await the update to the long-term water supply strategy so that we know what actual projects are and the capital funds needed, and then update these DCCs to support that.
Director Seegers.
So that begs the question, when is the regional water plan going to be updated?
Well, I'm guessing that'll be after the water summit. But Director Beamish.
Yeah, the town of Gibson is currently going through adoption of an excess service bylaw. Is that also available to the regional district in the same manner? And that is to get costs over and above DCCs for projects.
Thank you for the question, Chair. Staff can include research on that as part of our report back. There are instances of negotiating amenity agreements in excess of minimum requirements at the time that development is being proposed as well. Thank you.
Director Ties.
I think there's still a motion on the floor, isn't there?
Thank you very much. All right, seeing no further discussion on this motion, I hope. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion. All right. Have we exhausted this topic, and can we now move on to green waste? Oh, Director Tice.
I do have one more question, and that is if there was a way for new water applications, to only be permitted to use fresh water indoors and excluding toilets, and meaning that they would have to make other provisions to use outside water and toilets through rainwater catchment or whatever. Which one of these options would that fit, if in any? And I'm kind of curious.
Staff, can we regulate toilets?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Again, I think that is the germ of the question that that staff will endeavor to answer in reporting back. So looking at specific strategies for water conservation and considering which of these tools, using the analytical lens described on page 10, to provide further information in areas that seem to be of the most interest to the committee, will be what staff do next. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? No. Great. All right. Let's move on to Manager Solid Waste Programs, Green Waste Program Overview.
Thank you, Chair. As requested, this report provides an overview of the SCRD's current green waste program, including tonnage, a financial overview, procurement required, as well as provide some considerations regarding implementing a residential collection program for green waste. And thank you, and I welcome the opportunity to answer any of the committee's questions.
Director Theis.
Yeah, on page 16, there says here the types of green waste materials collected curbside typically include tree and hedge prunings, garden plants, and grass clippings. And the green waste program does not include hogweeds, leafy spurge, knotweed, or Scotch broom. I guess any of the invasives. What measures can we put in place to ensure that invasives are not part of the green waste, and what can be done with invasives?
Staff, please.
Thank you for the question, Chair. In terms of what materials are or aren't included, that would be done through the contract for processing in terms of what's in or what's out. Education on the side of the SCRD for what's in or what's out, that would be part of our responsibility. And I believe there was one other question. For disposal options, right now planning for disposal will be included as part of the referral process that came out of the May 23rd or May 28th board, rather.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. With regards to invasive species, some of them, there currently are no ways to dispose of them here on the Sunshine Coast. The only thing you can do is burn them, and we can't burn. So I am working on a process for that, but there's nothing we can publicly say at this point.
Director Beamish.
In terms of green waste in the kind of Elphinstone and Area D, or rather Area F, if we reduce the volume of green waste, that would impact the green waste drop-off, I'm assuming. And is there a subsequent plan that would be the change of funding for that site would be changed? Would that continue to be available as an SCRD function? Or would the be expanded to include commercial green waste drop-off?
Staff?
These are all board decisions. Currently, there is a drop-off location on the south coast. It is not suited to accept commercial materials because they are there's a tipping fee associated with that, and where there's no scale at that location at the moment. So, as a result, we're not able to collect tipping fees there, and hence it's not available for commercial hauling. For commercial drop-off. In terms of the area E, it is a board decision if they even if a South Coast site is continued to be desired. The contract is up for renewal, and it's indicated in the report on page 16. There are 3 contracts that are currently up for renewal, and one of them is operations of the South Coast Green Waste Drop-Off Facility.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. One of the conversations that I've been having with Trevor Pike, the fire chief in Sechelt, is with regards to stockpiling on particularly acreages. Yes, we have some on smaller lots in Sechelt, but it's the bigger lots that are an issue. Once the burning bylaws were passed so that people actually couldn't burn on their lots anymore, they've been stockpiling a lot of the green waste. I don't know what the extent of that is in the rural areas, the electoral areas. So I think that's why the question is here. Are people actually dealing with their waste? Are they hauling it away, or are they stockpiling it on their sites? Would collection at the curbside make a difference? And I'm looking at it more from a fire prevention issue. There is an issue with stockpiling and the dry brush that's being collected on some of these lots. which has a fire hazard impact.
And I'd like to add to that the current recommendation for disposing of broom is to pile it up and let it dry. Well, that stuff is just tinder. It's really dangerous. I wouldn't want to be doing that on my property, thanks very much. Do we have any way of determining what the demand would be for green waste pickup? I can tell you, as just from emails and things that I receive, I've only received one email from somebody who wanted to get pickup because they aren't able to haul it themselves. We do have a lot of seniors, but we're trying to plan without having a very clear idea of the demand or what the public is interested in. And I'm wondering if there is some way that we can even do a survey to see what kind of demand is out there.
Staff recently did not do a survey of any kind in terms of the appetite in the community for having green waste, but we could explore what is possible there and what the time frame for that would be.
I would also be interested to know if other regional districts have implemented green waste pickup, what was the impact? Like, what was the usage? What was the impact on any dumping facilities that they might have had, if they had them? Because it's difficult. Like, for the organics curbside pickup, we can assume, I think fairly safely, that about 95% of the households will use it. But to implement another program that maybe only a small number of households will use is a different issue. And the costs are high and the benefits are less clear. So, Director Seegers.
Thank you. I do know that in the District of Sechelt, we are looking at both organics and green waste. And I seem to recall that there's no additional charge for the green waste pickup. It does impact the pickup provider because they have to keep it separate in their vehicles, and so it determines what stock they buy to actually provide the service. But there was no charge, no difference in the cost.
Presumably that's for a limited quantity, like a paper bag full.
At the curbside, yes.
At the curbside, yeah. It still doesn't address the volumes that we have in the rural areas. I took 5 pickup truck loads of blackberries out of my backyard a couple of years ago. It was impressive, and I don't have a very big yard. So I wonder whether this is the solution for a rural area. But Director Theis.
Yeah, to support that, I can only speak from personal experience, but most larger properties like the one I own create too much to use curbside pickup because it just the amount of volume would just be out of control, especially using cedar branches and things like that basically you can't stuff in a sack anyway. And then to be honest, I don't think it's worth it for the fewer high density areas in Area D with the smaller properties to implement a universal curbside pickup. So to me, I think we either need to consult the community on a larger scale to see whether the need is actually there, or we just stay with the program as it is right now.
Further to that, I'm going to, the recommendations on page 13 are to continue the current green waste program. So I'm wondering if anybody would make a motion to that effect. Director Theis. Yes, a second. Director Hiltz. Director.
Thank you. This is with regards to, page 17. says timelines for next steps. So I understand the competitive process with continuation of the green waste program depends on if curbside collection service will be initiated and its scope. So we have contracts that are expiring that we need to look at soliciting providers for. And do we know what kind of time frame we're looking at that? Given there was some potential interest in a survey, how would that impact this provision of service?
We're currently, if based on the direction of the board, we could start these processes shortly. And one of the options could be is that we include in the contract if a survey would be done, if it would be considered curbside collection services in the future, that we try to implement that include it in all the 3 contracts as an option. However, I'm not sure if that would have an impact on the proposals in terms of the cost.
Follow-up?
Yeah, follow-up. So what kind of timing? Like, when do these contracts expire? When do we need to have other contracts in place?
From a staff perspective, we would like to have them all in place in the upcoming 5-6 months.
Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, a couple questions. It seems like that the green waste is the accuracy of the numbers are less than what goes into the landfill. So I'm looking at the numbers like the South Coast, 1,681, and Salish soils. Are those scaled in numbers, or are those using bin as a deposits as an estimate? And the other bit I'm looking at is the revenue from commercial scaling, which is when I divide it by the numbers, it's like about 70 or 90 tons of commercial. So the distribution of commercial versus residential, and then the third bit is how many residents would actually take 5 tons of green waste? So why is there a 5-ton limit on? It seems like an excessive amount for a residence to take. That's like a dump truck full, and I don't know many residents that have a dump truck.
Staff, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do my best to answer. There's a series of questions. The first question, the tonnage data is from scaled data. Commercial versus residential. I would have to look into that and provide a further analysis, either as a percentage. The dollar amount, so the revenue, that is from the scale, either at the Sechelt landfill or the Pender Harbour transfer station. And the last question regarding the tonnage, it's a former board resolution. Set that amount.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. So Pender Harbour transfer station, Salish soils, and the Sechelt landfill all have scales. South Coast site does not. So if at some point in the future, I mean, I don't know, we're looking at probably a 5-year contract or a 3-year contract or something. If at some point in the future, should we want to implement green waste pickup at curbside in any of the electoral areas, I believe that the 3 contracts, and I'm just looking for confirmation, the 3 contracts that have scales are based, we pay based on the volume. But then how would that impact South Coast should curbside collection be implemented there?
So right now for the South Coast site, there's 2 ways that, in terms of the material that's being charged. One is on the processing. So the trucks are scaled in, and those fees and charges, we pay a per ton rate. And then we pay a hauling rate per truck. So if there was curbside collection and there is a resulting decrease in tonnage, so there would be, in theory, less trucks, so less number of trucks, so less number of per truck charges. And then the material being delivered to the processor, when it's being scaled, if there's less tonnage, then there would be the equivalent less fees and charges.
Follow-up.
So follow-up. So if we go out to tender now, or to RFP, whatever, and get some people who will provide these services, should we implement curbside collection of green waste down the road, our costs would just go down for the providers of this service here.
Yes, that's correct. On the processing side, there will be another cost there for processing of curbside green waste.
I'm just going to speak as Area E Director here. When it comes to curbside pickup, I can see a hierarchy of importance. Garbage is so important. We've been doing it a long time. Organics is a clear win. Recycling, I'm on the fence about. And green waste, I'm not seeing a big win here. I'm seeing, more services that people will be paying into and will be unhappy about. I would rather see people get used to the organics first and not try to bring in services that are likely to be unpopular. Director Seegers?
Thank you. I agree. I agree with what you're saying. I don't see the need right now in the regional areas, in the electoral areas, for the green waste collection. My concern was just if we get into, as we'll see further on in some of the other reports, if we get into a fixed rate contract and we have less product, in some cases we're still paying the fixed rates. I just want to ensure that should we at some point down in the future reduce the volume, it actually does have a corresponding impact on our costs.
Director Beamish.
Yeah, talking about the green waste in the South Coast area there, the private haulers, like contractors who go to homes and do the yard work and things of that nature, usually in a pickup truck type of volume, where do they take theirs? Now, do they have to, because they're not supposed to go to the drop-off, so do they have to drive up to Seashelt then to dispose of that, or do they have, is that what's showing up in the woods as well, do you think?
Yes, they would need to deliver the material to Seashelt, so either directly to Salish Soils or to the Seashelt landfill.
Given the volume, I'd be interested to know the volumes of that and how much actually a pickup truck generates in terms of fees as opposed to what an annual licensing of that same business would be, allowing them to drop off at the green waste drop-off in Gibson's. So that we didn't actually have to have those GHGs generated going down the coast. That was the whole purpose in setting up that site in the first place. It was, we're going to do away with backyard burning. We need to provide an alternative. Well, the alternative was a landfill. And we said, well, we don't want all those cars going up and down the coast, so let's create that alternative closer. And then let's have one truck. And in fact, at that time, they were going to West Howe Sound with the product. And so if it was possible to not put a scale in, but simply say, look, based upon our analysis, an average commercial type user is going to pay X for a load, seasonal licensing for that user to allow them to use the drop-off might recover the same amount and offset any additional cost of hauling that material. There may need to be kind of an expansion of the site. I don't know, but that have to be looked at. Just something I've thought about is that why are we chasing those guys up and down the coast? They charge it back to their clients, so that their cost is going to be charged on their bill. So it's actually the clients paying them. Just a thought.
I think that's a great thought. It might be a motion, but we do have a motion on the floor. And the motion is to renew to start the procurement process to continue the current green waste program. Any further discussion on that? All in favor? Any opposed? No? That passes. Thank you very much. Director Beamish, did you want to make a motion to ask staff to look into into the prospect of licensing commercial users to use our green waste facility?
If it requires a motion, I'd be prepared to make that as an alternative for the South Coast site.
Staff, please.
Well, I think there'd have to be some analysis done because it sounds quite like business licensing for which we do not have the authority to implement. So whether there would be some sort of permitting process, but the logistics of monitoring and issuing, I think, could be quite challenging. We could look at, do some further analysis of the options, though.
Right now, I can assure you, a lot of commercial users have their trucks without signs on them and are using the site, so that I see them all the time. Yeah.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. Have we ever looked at putting a scale in at that site?
Staff, please.
We haven't, given that it's not our site at the moment.
All right. If we have no further motions and no further discussion, can we move on to the next item on our agenda, which is sorry? Timeout. All right. We'll take a 5-minute break. Get back to business here. Next item on our agenda is SCRD Recycling Depot's overview. Over to staff, please.
Thank you, Chair. As requested, this report provides an overview of the SCRD's Recycling Depot service. It includes a summary of the provincial program for residential packaging and paper products that's operated by Recycle BC. It also covers what materials are included and a financial overview. The report also includes a summary of the impacts on the recycling depots should curbside collection in electoral areas B, D, E, and F be implemented. And thank you, and I welcome the opportunity to answer any of the committee's questions.
So, do we have questions? Rural directors? Director Ties.
One question is, are there any anticipated reductions in operational costs to the depots if curbside recycling is implemented? Because the depots will still be there, but would there be actually any kind of reduction in cost?
We have currently, thank you by the way for the question, we have currently a contract in place with them with the depots until November 2020. So from that side, so only after any new contract would go after, could be amended to address that. In terms of the incentives, no, the baling, our South Coast site also has a baler, which is an own business component. This is not regulated through the SCRD, it's outside of our contract, but that would go down as well because that volume that they're processing and the additional incentives they're receiving associated with the baler would go down as well.
Director Halls.
I have a few comments from Lori Pratt for you. She mentioned that seeing the landfill from the air was mind-blowing and that the piles of discarded items are shocking. She said currently GRIPS accepts only packaging, not products. Do Salish and Gibson's Recycling, Salish Soils and Gibson's Recycling accept beyond packaging? Example, if you have broken dishes, where do you take them?
The materials that are under contract with the SCRD, so the Recycle BC materials, they're summarized on page 21.
Okay.
So that is all of the materials covered under Recycle BC, so under the provincial regulation for packaging and paper products. If there's any other materials accepted at the depots outside of those materials, then that would be up to each of the at this point, it's up to each of the individual depot operators. So it varies based on the depot what other stewardship programs or other drop-off items they accept.
And this might overlap what you just said, but her number 3 is, are there other entities on the coast that will help divert items such as clothing, broken dishes, appliances, etc.? But I think you just answered that. And is Gibson's Recycling the only place? Is this an opportunity for an entrepreneur maybe? And are there supports provincially or federally to divert these items? how can we better support this?
I have a related question, which is I remember that the SCRD a couple of years ago had a resource like a handout or something that gave information on where you could take various types of items like fabric. Do we have that? Is it up to date?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Yes, the SCRD has what's called the Recycling Directory. We have that available in print and then a link to it on our website. And there is also a dedicated page on our website for reuse.
In addition to that, yes, that directory is up to date and is updated frequently.
Director Beamish?
I'm looking at the table on page 3 of the report, and this identifies the accepted items at depots and the accepted curbside. And the last 5 items at depot are not accepted at curbside. I'm assuming that if we go curbside, well, first of all, where does the curbside material get processed? Where would that go once it's picked up? The first question. And secondly, one of the major side benefits of the depot, or to the depot, I assume, is the pop cans and wine bottles and all the other things that they collect, because having been involved with Habitat for Humanity and process all those in the past up there, that was a significant revenue stream which actually helped the Habitat program. If those are picked up curbside, the depot, I assume, then would not get that benefit. Do they then become less viable as operations? And thirdly, it's certainly in Gibson's, the depot is a one-stop shop. It's a very busy place. They take much more than is on this list here. They take household garbage and all those other things you're talking about. They actually have a box drop-off for clothing, for donated clothing, and books and all sorts of other things that they take there. So that I would certainly not want to see a situation where suddenly we implement a new program and the existing program is no longer a viable program, and when the contract comes up, they simply don't want to compete for it. They have a valuable piece of property that they can convert into other uses. And that could be very challenging for everybody in the South Coast, because all of a sudden now, all this other material has still got to go somewhere. And so if we could implement a program that is convenient to the doorstep, all this other material that's there, glass packaging, polyform, all those other materials still has to go somewhere. So the depot would do that, but they're not probably as viable as they are with the other materials. So just a question, if unless they were being processed through them, which may be the plan, I don't know.
Thank you for the question, Chair. The first question regarding where the curbside materials would go, that would be determined through Recycle BC. And in terms of the materials, as identified on page 21, those last items starting at glass packaging and moving downwards, glass packaging also includes bottles, jars, refundables. So those would not be accepted curbside and would still need to be delivered to a depot of some form, whether that's through donations or whether it's directly to a bottle depot.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. Sechelt has curbside recycling, have had for a number of years. And so the glass, et cetera, all of those various items that are not collected curbside go to Sailor Soils. They don't have as big a location as they do down at Gibson's Recycling.
Yeah.
But it's a busy place. People are coming all the time.
Yeah, and I think they probably also they're probably more diversified in their revenue streams. Yeah.
Director Ties?
Going back to the Habitat for Humanity, I'm just wondering if 100% of the proceeds of that recycling actually go to the Habitat, or is there some sort of Is it sort of the net proceeds because there's somebody that's actually doing the sorting and managing of that material?
The SCRD contracts related to the depots are only for the materials that are collected at the depots. There are any other material streams like the one with Habitat for Humanity, which is solely managed by the depot operator itself. It's actually more by the drop-off operator itself. It's not really part of the SCRD contract in terms of depot. So we have no interaction with any of the materials that are collected, like the glass jars, etc., etc. Other than those, the non-refundable, which are part of the Recycle BC program. The refundable are not part of the Recycle BC program. Maybe that's a better answer to give. Thank you.
Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the motion and the support, it looks like Recycling BC is doing a review of the ICI materials. So this is kind of is that true? That's the first question. Are they looking for input, or are they doing a review, or what's the status of them reviewing the ICI?
Thank you. This is related to the next report on the agenda. ICI is currently not accepted is not part of the Recycle BC program, and they recently identified that they're not considering to include that as well any further than they're currently doing. Currently, they sometimes accept depot operators to do it, but then there is a reduced rate associated with it, and they're not planning any expansions or to that at the moment.
Okay, yeah, we got ahead of ourselves there. Director Seegers was next, then Beamish.
Okay, first of all, I noticed on the order paper that it indicates that for SCRD recycling depots, voting would only be B, D, E, and F. The District of Sechelt also contributes to this. This is something that we looked at doing a service review on a few years back, 2 terms ago, I guess. And the rationale for refusing the service review was that not all products are picked up at curbside. Some of them still go to the depot. So it was not something that was looked at by the regional district at that time. So I just have to say, from a District of Sechelt perspective, once everybody's on an even playing field there, I'll be a little happier. If we look at page 23, third last paragraph starts on, based on current service levels and contract commitments, any decrease in incentive revenue will need to be offset by higher taxation. So do I take that to assume that we have fixed rate contracts with our service providers at this point, or our depots, that any decrease in volume will not be reflected in a decrease in cost to us?
Okay, that was 2 things for staff. Okay. All
Yes.
right, it was 1.
Yes. Any initiation of curbside, as I just indicated, our contract with the depots are until 2020, and curbside is not considered in those contracts.
But it's fixed.
But it's fixed.
Director Beamish?
I was going to make the same point as Director Seegers relative to participation. As you can see by the table on page 21, at the Gibson Depot, the volume is significantly higher than elsewhere on the coast. I can't believe that all comes from D and E, so that there's a significant part of, yet we are not part of the function, nor are we part of the impact of the function if changes were made. I'd be concerned about that.
Staff, please.
Thank you. There was an error on the order paper. The voting reflected on the paper relates to the refuse collection service and not to the solid waste service, which is the recycling program in general, which all areas contribute to. So that was an error, and my apologies for that.
I just had a couple of comments from my area. First, I actually found the Recycling BC report quite depressing. We know that the supposedly great idea somebody had to recycle pop bottles as fleece turns out to be an environmental disaster because, of course, it just creates more microfibers of plastic. And I see that Recycling BC apparently is creating carpets out of plastic, which is, again, just releasing more microplastics into our environment, which is not a solution. We, in fact, need to get rid of the plastic, unfortunately, or encapsulate it in some way that it can't escape. From the point of view of Area E, at least, there's not much of a win here for recycling pickup because it will be expensive, very expensive in our case, and we'll also have to pay for the depot. So and without having any sort of anticipation of how much we might gain by recycling pickup, like how much further we would divert from the landfill, it's really hard to justify. So, we have had substantial tax increases, and the cost of organics pickup is significant. So, I'm reluctant to go down this road at this time. I don't know how the other areas feel. Director Tyus?
So with Area D, the situation is somewhat different because the cost would be considerably lower. And when I consulted with some members of the community, it did make sense, especially for those that have mobility issues or transportation issues, for them to be able to at least get the majority of their recycling taken care of, so that they can maybe take the bus with a shopping bag full of stuff once a week rather than not being able to take care of it at all. So in Area D, it does make sense. And my next question from staff would be, to me, the most effective way of having curbside pickup would be weekly, along with a manual pickup in split trucks with organics. That would make sense to me, so that every week, along with organics, comes the recycling. But there may be other solutions or other ways to make this more effective. But I thought I'd throw that in the discussion pond and see what happens.
Director Hilt.
Area F perspective. So far, Area F people, I think, feel that they're relatively well behaved and trained to go to the depot. The people who are having the more troublesome is the islands people who are coming off of bringing their recycling. It's easy to get things on the islands. It's harder to get things off the islands. And they do pay into this service, and there's, over 900 folios in that area. So they're looking for more enhanced kind of a recycling depot at the BC Ferries or some integration. And even BC Ferries, I don't know how their recycling system works. So if there was some way for BC Ferries to cooperate to enhance the recycling depot for the islands people, that's what Area F is looking for. There's no one jumping up and down on curbside, and the incremental rolling out of changing waste behavior with the food waste is the one that people are probably the most interested in. And there isn't the composition studies, I don't think, show much recycling ending up in the waste stream right now. So people seem to be using the recycling depots well.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. One of the things I'm noticing in these reports is we've got each one of the items separate. We've got garbage separate, recycling separate, organic separate, et cetera, and the associated impact on costs. I think as we look at making decisions here, and particularly in the rural areas where they don't have some of these services currently, we need to see what the total impact will be. Because once we actually implement organics and recycling, then garbage goes back to twice a week rather than once a week. So what is the final cost going to be? What are the savings of the garbage that will help offset some of the other? I know that we're looking at that in Seashelt, and we've just, as it indicates in the report, we've just joined Recycle BC, and we're looking at the fact that implementing organics on top of the recycling and the garbage, because we're going back to every other week with what we're getting from Recycle BC, will actually be pretty much breaking even with the current costs. So I'd like to see what the overall impact is from the various changes, because looking at each one individually doesn't give us the overall picture. And I'd like to see how do we do that? How do we get that from staff?
Are we requesting a report? And if we are requesting a report, when are we requesting it? Or would this be part of the budget consideration for next year anyway?
I don't think we can wait till budget because they're looking at doing the RFPs at this point. So decisions have to be made about whether or not you're going to go forward with that service. So you need to have what the final picture is going to look like to determine which way you're going to go.
At the moment, we are only receiving these reports for information. So the question is, when are we making decisions? Staff.
Thank you. Because we've not received direction. Okay. Let me do a step back. In February, in the reports in February, which were based on the RFP we did last year on curbside collection services, those included all the costs for all services. So those reports provide that overview of what would be the total impact of doing curbside for green waste as well as for recycling, and what would be the reduced cost of doing weekly garbage versus bi-weekly garbage. So those reports put forward in January, February include those costs. The second part of the question was in terms of, I think, the timing, and we were asked there was a request to provide an overview of what it would take to implement curbside. That's what this report is. If the board wants to, there's an opportunity for them to make a recommendation that they want to make a decision that we go out for an RFP. That will be the next step. If for recycling, if it's desired for one of the areas or for all, we can initiate an RFP and go from there.
Director Halls.
There's been a lot of discussion within the people of Half Moon Bay in the area about having recycling pickup on a weekly basis. It's difficult having so much recycling, and the closest recycling depot is 17 minutes away, minimum. So there are a couple ways to, a couple suggestions that might work. One would be recycling for everyone, recycling pickup. The second would be opting in to having recycling pickup, whether, if you were to have that added to your taxes, I don't know how that would work. If everybody didn't want to do it, you could opt in to doing it. And the third would be to have a recycling depot of some sort within Half Moon Bay, simply because it is a lot to take truckloads of recycling to Seashelt on every other week. And not everybody has trucks to transport all of this stuff. Not everybody has garages. And you can't keep it outside because of bears and other animals, because there is remnants of food on most of the recycling. So it is a bit tricky living there and not having regular recycling pickup. And I think it would also encourage the locals to recycle even more than they're doing already. So that's just my opinion.
I'm just going to do a little straw poll here, but what I'm hearing is that there is an interest in areas D and B in recycling curbside pickup, but not at this time in E and F, primarily due to the cost and to the very successful Gibson's Recycling Depot, which has a popular following.
Given, thank you, Chair, based on if there is a desire to establish curbside collection services for B and D only, it will require the establishment of a new service area, because it is a service that's not provided to the entire service area currently covered by the curbside collection service establishment bylaw.
Question.
So there will be a process for that as well, etc.
And is this a lengthy or time-consuming process?
Well, generally speaking, anytime you create a new service, it's probably going to be a 4-month process to get the elector approval. The bylaws in place, the bylaw approvals, the elector approval, and the bylaw adoption.
Director Ties.
So that begs the question, should I be making a motion to create a new service called curbside recycling, and so that areas B and D can have curbside recycling if they want?
Was that a motion?
I guess I'll make that motion.
Good. Do we have a seconder? We have a seconder. Any further discussion? Director Lee.
Where would the funding come from to do that work?
Thank you. So the question I'm going to answer is the last question first, is where would the funding coming from to establish the function? I think that it's I think from the general, yeah.
So the way we would handle it is like a feasibility service or study, and so the hard costs of an alternative approval process, which is, I'm assuming, the method you would want to use to get elector approval because of the cost effectiveness of it, would be billed against a future service that was established. If we were not able to get elector approval and the service was not established, it would be allocated to those electoral areas that participated in the approval process.
Sorry, I'm just thinking about this. I'm thinking about what is the cost of going this route, hiving off to electoral areas versus the cost of doing all of them, and who ends up paying the cost? Either way. Staff, please.
One option we could do is we could provide a report. What would be the process with more details about what would be the process of establishing a service area for B&D, and an estimate on costs and the financial implications associated with that.
I would appreciate that because, and an update on the cost of doing this in ENF, and I believe that we have exhausted any possibility of getting Recycling BC coverage in our areas. Right. Director Seegers?
Thank you. I'm wondering if there's a step you'd want to do before that, before we actually go ahead and start looking at putting the process together to separate and have B and D join in on recycling. I'm wondering if you have enough information in your areas, E and F, to determine that no, you don't want to have recycling, or your residents don't want to have that, or if additional work needs to be done in those areas before we go ahead and establish a separate service area and a separate function for this. So it might be that some initial work needs to be done to determine whether or not we even need to go down this route. And that would be up to you.
Director Beamish.
I also wonder if we're putting the cart before the horse here. I know that we just did a business survey in the town, And one of the questions we asked on that survey was, what would be the impact of the elimination of single-use plastic bags and other plastic products? And one store responded that that would impact them negatively. Everybody else strongly favored it. So by reducing the overall stream of recycling products, taking plastics out of the system, using London Drugs is a depot for packaging sort of thing. I think we're on that cusp of making other changes, and I wonder what a contract at this point in time for curbside pickup would look like, as opposed to what it might look like 3 years from now. And it could be very different, given the initiative announced also by the federal government of wanting to focus on the removal of plastics and other kind of packaging from the waste stream, that we might simply be wanting to do. We are going to introduce a bylaw to eliminate single-use plastic bags and packaging by January 1st, 2020 in Gibsons, and so that in terms of the use. And I think other places are looking at the same thing, and I know there's some challenges around that, but we've got a very strong indication from the businesses in our community that they support that. They would like to move in other directions. They'd like to say maybe we could have a Gibson's bulk buy of a cloth bag that would be purchased at cost by businesses, and they would give that out, and be different things we're looking at. But we might actually be impacting the waste stream that would, if we go into a contract right now that says, oh, we're going to take all this stuff, and then 2 years from now, all this product is eliminated, we might be paying for more than we actually need as a service. So just a thought.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. So I believe that our contracts are based on volume with these facilities, and so that'd be a question for staff. Are they based on volume? And if so, then your concerns are mute at this point, because as we reduce, we pay less anyway.
The contract with depots are based on volume, in the sense of that there was a prediction made what the volumes would look like, and the price was negotiated based on those volumes. So significant changes in the volume could have an impact on the volume processed by the facilities, but not directly until renegotiation on the contract values.
Follow-up?
Yes. So could that be part of the negotiation in the contract, that volumes are potentially looked at every year, 2 years, whatever, to reflect diversion or reduction in products?
Sorry, maybe I didn't understand your question right away. I was talking about the contract for depots. Contracts for curbside collection are not volume-based. They are based on number of households and frequency of pickup, not on volume. So any incentives, any programs to get less recyclable material in the waste stream would not have an impact on the curbside contract, but could have on depot contracts moving forward.
Okay, I'd like to circle back to the motion that's on the floor here. The motion on the floor is?
That the SCRD create a new service for curbside recycling in B and D.
All right, Director Tyus?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, a process question at this point. If we just want to get a report as to what the costs and implications might be, do we amend this motion, or do we vote on it and defeat it and then make a new one?
Thank you. I think it's substantively different from the motion on the floor, so it would probably be best to defeat the motion on the floor and make a new recommendation.
Okay, then.
Director Seegers.
So process question, given this is a new function but impacts all of us, who actually votes on this?
That is the interesting question, given the way the voting is set up at committee. But I'm going to suggest Because a service doesn't actually exist at this time, I would suggest that all directors vote on, in this instance. It's not clear in our procedure bylaw, but that's how it would be handled at the board as well. Anytime a new service is created by the regional district, it's voted on by all directors.
Would Director Ties like to speak against his motion?
Yeah, I'd like to call the question so that we may defeat it.
All right. All in favor of the motion on the floor? Yes, we did have a seconder. All right. All opposed? The motion is defeated. Director Halls.
I just want to add a comment also. I discussed also the idea of maybe not necessarily curbside pickup, but perhaps looking into the cost of having a recycling depot in our areas as opposed to curbside pickup. Having, looking at the cost difference between the two.
Thank you. We can include it in the staff report, but one of the considerations would be that it would, of course, impact the current depot significantly.
Director Ties.
So I'll make a new motion that staff investigate and report back to board the impact of creating a new service called rural area curbside recycling for areas B and D. Does that sound like a decent
Staff?
motion?
If I can make one addition, you indicated implications. My suggestion would be process and implications of. Thank you.
Good. Do you have that? Good. Do we have a seconder for this motion? Yes, we have a seconder. Who's voting on this one? Oh, because this is a report and it's on curbside. Okay, that's good. I'm in favor of this, particularly given that the rural directors have a tour of Gibson's Recycling Monday. So I would like to be informed on that before making any further decisions. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? No? All right, that passes. Thank you very much. Next item is the commercial recycling update.
Thank you, Chair McMahon. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on recycling options for the commercial, industrial, and institutional sectors on the Sunshine Coast. The reports describe the recent decline in recycling options on the coast and its impact to listed sectors and the potential of recyclable materials being buried at the Chinsha landfill. These changes are in response to the changing global market conditions for recyclable products. Staff recommend to advocate the province for a change in the recycling regulation to address any potential impacts to the community and lifespan of our own landfill. Staff will be pleased to answer any questions.
Okay, bearing in mind that the time is noon, just reminding folks, do we have questions or comments on this, Director Ties?
Well, I'm very much for advocating, but in the meantime, the ICI haulers have nowhere to go. So I'm wondering what options are for them, and also knowing what the success rate of UBCM resolutions are. Is this a realistic option?
I hear two questions. I'll answer the second one first. This morning we learned that the Thompson-Nicola Regional District and the City of Kamloops are going to bring forward a motion to UBCM on this item. Second is that there is the current processor on the coast for commercial recycling, which is Waste Management, is still able to collect ICI material recyclables on the coast. but it's now only one where there used to be multiple. And that's actually the decline in options. There are less. They decided that given the change in market conditions, they would only process materials they collect themselves. That is the big change.
Director Ties?
So yeah, I was approached by a small business in my area who does a lot of the small business recycling for Lower Gibsons as well as Roberts Creek, and he has nowhere to go. So that's just where it's going to end.
It is because ICI recycling is currently not a service from the SRD. It's a private regulated service. It's the processor on the coast that it's fully within its means to determine what kind of materials FMU is accepting. So that's what they did.
Director Seegers?
So because Recycle BC is responsible for the trucking and the processing. No, just the processing. Is that right?
Only for residential.
Yes.
Only for
trucking and processing?
Yes.
Trucking and processing. So we're in the process, District of Sechelt's in the process of, we signed on with Recycle BC, right? So Waste Management is no longer responsible once we, actually now, they're no longer responsible for the trucking and the processing. So that their volume has gone down quite substantially. It's going to a different site now, as determined by Recycle BC. So they will have difficulty with less volume to be able to find markets for their product, and it will be more costly for them. So it has a huge impact on the coast here. So the recommendation that's here, requesting Recycle BC to look at incorporating collection and processing of commercial, I'm totally in support of.
Do I hear a motion?
Yes, I'll make the recommendation as presented on the page here.
And we have a seconder. Any further discussion of the recommendation? All in favor? Any opposed? Excellent, that passes. I think we can move on. Oh, Director Ties.
So I just have one clarification question. So those businesses that were using the small business, do they now have to use waste management, and that is their only option to have their recycling needs taken care of, or is that even an option?
It is up to them to determine what the most feasible option, realistic option for them is. One of the options they can consider is connected with waste management. There might be opportunities for other companies to come to the coast and say, we pick up the material, but that's a business decision, not an SRD.
Okay, I think we can move on to the next item, which is, Director Halls, yes.
I just want to read Lori Pratt's comment. She just said she fully supports it, but would like to expand beyond packaging. Is this possible? But I believe you already answered that.
Director Ties?
I also have one more comment or question. And that is that I assume that commercial businesses are already paying a proportionally higher amount for recycling through their property taxes. Should that not entitle them to use the system? And so that further supports the motion we just made. So, or am I mistaken?
Thank you. So, yes, they would pay their property tax rates, and of course, businesses pay a higher rate under the regulation, as we learned at the BC Assessment Workshop yesterday.
Oh, that just made me curious. Many businesses are operating from residential properties in the rural areas, and we don't know which ones are businesses, so presumably many of them are using the residential system. Would that be the case?
Yes.
Okay. Now, can we move on to the next item, which is single-use plastics ban considerations? The question on the Coast Reporter this week is, do you support the single-use plastics ban? And the poll is going heavily in favor. So what does staff have to say this morning?
Thank you, Chair. As requested, this report outlines the legislative options available at each level of government when considering a ban on single-use plastic, and includes updates on current initiatives to restrict or ban single-use plastics from the federal, provincial, and local governments. As well, this report provides information about the available approaches for the SCRD as a regional district, which are different than what are available for municipalities. And I welcome the opportunity to answer any questions.
Director Halls.
I'm speaking for Lori Pratt again, and she said discussions with commercial, retail, industry must start now. The ban needs to be earlier rather than later, and a step plan is fine, but a plan needs to start a decade ago. She wants to make a motion that PMAC, PMAC, the board and staff develop a consultation and outreach plan for commercial, industry, and retail on the ban of single-use plastics commencing January 1st, 2020. The purpose is to start banning single-use plastics in 2020, but using a stepped approach similar to Vancouver.
Do I see a seconder for that motion? Wait a minute, staff, please.
Thank you. As outlined in the report, the SRD is not able to ban single-use plastics. Local governments can. The only thing we can do is support them in implementing a ban and outreach and education to support any implementation.
Alternately, looking at the approaches on page 90, I think we should look at all 4 of the suggestions there. I would be in favor of moving forward with all of them. Director Theis?
Yeah, so one motion that I've got here is that would work with the 4th point would be a motion that staff draft letters to the Ministry of Environment to create province-wide regulations to reduce single-use plastics and disposable plastic packaging. So that would be...
Staff, please.
One question for on this suggested motion is: would such a provincial ban be? Would the request be to implement such a provincial ban prior to the implementation of a federal ban, or the interlinkages with that one? Thank you.
Director Beamish.
I guess my concern and Gibson's concern is that federal ban could simply be a politics, and that we may never see it happen, and so that we need to kind of move forward at the local level and make decisions that help to force that to happen.
Director Theis.
So yeah, back to my motion. I think the provincial level needs to be addressed because yes, looking at the polling, the chance of the federal thing actually happening, who knows? Yeah, I'm wondering if I can have a seconder for that motion, or do we need to read it out? Looks like Mr. Beamish there.
We have a seconder. Was that single-use plastic bags and disposable plastic packaging?
Yeah, so the motion that staff draft letters to Ministry of Environment to create province-wide regulations to reduce single-use plastics and disposable plastic packaging.
Further discussion? Director Beamish?
I'd like to propose an amendment, and that would be to eliminate as opposed to reduce, so that we move into reduction is measurable how sort of thing, but elimination is simply we move towards elimination. It could be a step process, but we move to eliminate the products.
Director Tyson?
I think reducing could mean eliminate, but I think there are certain products and uses right now where actually getting rid of it right now is difficult. For example, there was one example given where some patients need straws in order to be able to have sustenance, and so can we find reasonable alternatives? So I think just reducing at this point would probably work, and then hopefully that will turn into a ban.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. I'm in favor of the reduction. I had a brother-in-law who had multiple sclerosis, and he could not have used a cardboard straw or a paper straw or whatever. He needed to have the plastic straw with the bendable top on it because he couldn't use his limbs, right? So elimination would have been very difficult for him. So I'm totally in favor of reduction and the letter.
I might note that that would include daily wear contact lenses, but anyway, not that I like them to begin with. Director Lee.
I was just wondering where we are, because I think I heard a motion here, but it wasn't seconded, so we're okay. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Motion has been seconded, and I'm hoping that we can. Yes, that motion was not seconded. It was Andreas's motion to write to the province about reducing disposable plastics. If there's no further discussion, I'd like to call that question. All in favor? Any opposed? Good, that passes. Director Seegers?
Thank you. I'm wondering if Director Halls would like to revisit her motion, just removing the part about the ban, because I think it addresses the rest of the items that are in here if the ban piece is taken out.
The PMAC, the board and staff develop a consultation and outreach plan for commercial, industrial, and retail use of single-use plastics, commencing. How am I going to reword that?
Maybe to identify ways to reduce or eliminate use of plastics.
Okay. So find ways to reduce or eliminate the use of single-use plastics commencing January 1st, 2020.
Staff, please.
We, listening to the desired start date, we need to review our workload for the upcoming months and see where this falls in the priority in terms of RFPs and other things that are on the go. And also in terms of preparing for the implementation of organics curbside, which also requires a lot of outreach and education material. So what I can suggest is that we bring forward a report with a timeline and financial and operational implications for when we can do so. When we can start at, if there will be January 1st or a later date. But
can we formulate that as a motion that staff bring forward a report on timelines and process for working with commercial, industrial, and retail
And I would add to that and align that with the timelines for ban implementation from the local government, all local governments on the coast.
All right, if we could have a motion read back so that we know what we're doing.
Sorry for making it a mess.
I have a couple, but I'll go with Remco's. That staff bring forward a report with timeline and process for working with commercial and retail and align it with implementation of bans from other local governments.
Director Seegers.
I think we're missing the part about what it's for. It's reduction or elimination of single-use plastics.
Okay, how's that sounding now?
That staff bring forward a report
Staff, please.
That staff bring forward a report with timelines and implications for a consultation and outreach program for commercial, industrial, and retail sector with ways to reduce or eliminate single-use plastics.
Lovely. And do we have a seconder? Oh, there was one. Director Seegers.
And how to align it with the municipal government bans.
I think we've got something there. Do we have a seconder for this? Yes, we have a seconder for this motion. Further discussion? I would like to see, this is somewhat separate, but I would like to see the SCRD have a policy that we do not distribute bottled water at any SCRD facilities or events. But that's another question. All right. Everybody in favor of the motion on the floor? Any opposed? No. Thank you very much. That is passed.
Draft letter on page 82 that in our package that purports to be a letter to the province, Honorable George Heyman. Is that do we need a resolution to send that, or is that part of what the resolution that was earlier passed? Yeah, I think it seemed to be consistent with your motion, so the letter's already written. Yeah, good. Yeah, we don't need approval for that letter or anything. It's just good. Okay.
Well, this is all clear as mud. But I believe we may have gotten to item 9. The Director Lee, did you get? No. All right, Story, we're back. We're back on item 8 again. F. Director Hiltz.
The item of single-use plastics came to the board as a delegation from the Strawless campaign. That was a Van Guiton, and I would like to make a motion that the staff corresponds with Yvonne to follow up with her presentation and the decisions that have been made this afternoon or this morning, just to close the loop with the presentation, which was back in July. Don't need a motion?
We can do that.
Okay,
Thank you. All right. Now, marching bravely forward to the South Pender Harbor Water Main Replacement Project update, budget increase.
Thank you, Chair. In 2016, the SCRD applied for 3 grants as part of the Clean Water and Wastewater Fund in the Pender Harbor area, and we're fortunate to receive all 3. One of those grants is the North and South Pender Harbor Water Main Replacement Project. In 2017, on-site engineering designed over 5.5 kilometers of water main split between North and South Pender Harbor, and tendering followed. Unfortunately, all tenders were well over budget, so the scope for both North and South were reduced. Areas that would have the most impact for fire flow and hydrant placement were chosen. In 2018, further tendering took place and BA Blacktop was awarded a unit price contract for approximately 1.6 kilometers of waterline in South Pender and 1.3 kilometers of waterline in North Pender. Construction began in October of 2018 with mid-February 2019 as the projected completion date. But due to various setbacks, including a long period of snow on the ground and much larger than expected quantities of rock, blasting and water main installation was completed by May of 2019. Last month it became clear the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, MOTI, would be requiring full lane paving in many areas of Francis Peninsula Road rather than the patching that engineer design was based on. Staff, on-site engineering, MOTI and BA Blacktop worked together to optimize the paving plan so it would meet MOTI's requirements and be as cost-effective as possible. Some South Pender paving was completed in May, but the sections that were not paved remain gravel road. The results of the overall paving in North and South Pender has and will improve the road structure and surfaces for the entire community's benefit. Based on the review of work to complete this project, funding needs to increase to accommodate the higher than originally estimated construction costs, which are primarily due to the increase in blasting, paving, and engineering increases. Staff recommend that the project budget and associated funding be amended to reflect current estimates and actual costs. Thank you.
Director Lee.
First, I'd like to say that very much appreciate the $2.7 million grant that SCRD previously approved to get this done. That was very good and is very appreciated. And it falls under the asset management, old infrastructure that needs to be fixed and upgraded. And I guess we're all going to be facing that in the future for a lot of our stuff. So that asset management planning is exactly what we need, so we're ready ahead of time. It's not cheap. The user revenue is actually providing $864,000 approximately from the local people to get this done as well. That's about 24% of the project. So I just mentioned that because I think we're all going to be facing that in the future. There was a little overrun. It was roughly around 14%. Not extravagant for a project of this size. So actually, I'd really like to see the paving done. So I'd like to make a motion to accept the recommendations and get on with completing this project. So thank you.
And I see a seconder. Director Seegers.
Thank you. This is just a question, I think, for Tina around this. I notice in the recommendation, the South Pender talks about where the additional funding will come from and that the financial plan needs to be amended, but it doesn't say anything about that with regards to the North Pender. So I'm just wondering if that's something else that needs to be included in here, or if we have to wait for that to find out the final piece.
Thank you, Chair. The North Pender funding is already available. We just need approval to sign it to on-site.
Any further discussion of this item? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? Any opposed? No? Good, that passes. Thank you very much. Next item, Sunshine Coast Rotary Club offer of donation.
Chair. This report follows the delegation on April 25th from the Rotary Club to the SRD board. They generously offer to donate life-saving equipment to the SRD. Staff considered and suggested locations supporting procedural work for the SRD to actually accept that donation. It recommend to accept 7 AEDs and 6 rescue tubes. The maintenance and management of this equipment will raise service levels and drive the corresponding financial impact for the parks area. For the park service, apology. Preliminary estimate of this requirement is $4,300 annually. Though this might be refined as inspection frequency and the scope of ongoing partnership with the Rotary Club is confirmed. If the committee directs staff to proceed towards accepting the donation, staff requests that 2 additional clauses be added to the recommendation, and those are listed on page 104 of the report. Staff will be pleased to answer any questions the committee might have. Thank you.
Director Theis.
No. So I've kind of assembled the motion that essentially says what's asked for in the report, and that is the motion that staff accept the donation and deploy equipment as recommended, and that staff seek to offset staff time with ongoing partnership with Rotary Club, and that base budget funding for community parks, $650, be increased by $4,300 annually, and that staff report annually to the board as to the costs and operation of the program.
Do we have a seconder for the motion? We have a seconder. Director Seegers.
Thank you. If we look at page 104, there's a couple of pieces in there that would also need to be included as recommended from staff. Would you like to make an amendment to your motion?
Yes, so let's amend that and add the other one, that the 20 to 24 financial plan and HR plan be amended accordingly. Sorry.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. Did you also address the additional staff time, et cetera, in yours?
Yes, I believe he did. Yeah, he did.
With the $4,300.
Yeah, it's included in that. Did we have a seconder for the amendment? All right. I see no more excitement at the table, so perhaps we can vote on the motion. All in favor? The amendment, I'm sorry, we're voting on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? No. Amendment passes. How about the motion? All in favor of the motion? Any opposed? No. All right. That motion passes. Next item on the agenda is communications. We have an email from the Southern Sunshine Coast Farmers Institute. Do we want to take any actions at this time on their requests, or do we want to have some other sort of follow-up with them? Director Seegers.
I think Director Theis had his hand up first. We can follow him.
All right. I personally would like to just have an idea as to what it would mean to let food growers continue to water at stage 4, because I don't think we have that idea right now, and whether that's in fact feasible. So that could eventually be a motion, but I'll hear what other people have to say first.
I think that was a question for staff.
We currently don't. It's currently not in the drought management plan, so it could be something that could be considered as part of an update to the drought management plan 2020.
Director Seegers.
So I'm going to follow up on that first. What if we were to look at implementing that this year? Would that mean that we would implement stage 3 earlier and or stage 4 earlier?
The process would be that an update to the bylaw would be required, 422, and it would require. I would advise against it, given the situation we're currently in. If that would be considered, we would need to call stage 4 today. That's my gut feeling without doing any calculations.
Yeah, and I would add, without actually knowing what the farm water usage is, it would be reckless, I think, to go ahead with something like that. My question was that they also requested an additional rainwater harvesting grant available to food growers and farmers. Is that something that we can look into as perhaps a budget item for next year? Is that?
Yes, we can definitely provide a budget proposal to expand the current rainwater harvesting program to larger sizes with different associated volumes, to larger amounts of money and larger requirements for minimum volume. Yes.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. There's a few other things that they're talking about in there too. Micro drip irrigation systems, pond digging, or well drilling. So I think we'd want to have staff come back to us and look at which of these items that they've requested are feasible and what the cost implications and budget implications would be. So recommendation would probably be that we refer these requests to staff to come back and give us the implications financially for next budget cycle.
Okay, that's a motion. Would somebody like to second that motion? Yes, I see a seconder. Any further discussion? Director Tyus?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify that the motion essentially says that we're going to, that staff investigate meaningful grants and incentives to make farms less reliant on the municipal water system and report options back to the board by, I don't know, Q4 or something like that. Would that, yeah. And could we add that we would also want that staff determines the impact of letting food growers continue to water at stage 4 and report back?
Just a minute here. We already had a motion on the table.
Okay, sorry.
With a seconder.
Sorry?
Are you looking at an amendment to add that to the motion?
Well, maybe we should make that a separate motion.
Yeah,
okay.
Let's get this motion off the table. So, do we know what we're? No, we don't. Do you want to say that one more time, Director Seegers? Yeah.
Okay. So that I would say that the letter from the Southern Sunshine Coast Farmers Institute be referred to staff, and that staff report back in Q4 to committee with regards to the water saving measures requested in the letter and the impact financially on the budget. Does that cover it off?
I would suggest to on the feasibility of the implementation.
Yes.
Feasibility and implementations.
Perfect.
Implementation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Impacts of implementing the suggested measures.
Okay. That works. So that'll be on the tape that she'll be able to pull up.
I think we know what we're talking about, even if we're struggling a little in the wording here. So, we have a seconder for that motion, please? Yes, we have a seconder. Can I call the motion, please? All in favor? Fine, that passes. Finally, there was the question of livestock that was raised, and I'm wondering if there is any clarification that could be provided to the farmers on the question of livestock.
It has been clarified, and we can do it again, that livestock is excluded from the drought management plan as it currently stands.
Dr. Beamish.
Chair, I'd move receipt of the letter and that the letter be sent to them to acknowledge their concerns and the action taken by the board.
Seconder? Okay. Any further comments? All in favor? Great. Director Tyers.
I'd like to add one more motion that staff investigate, that staff determines the impact of letting food growers continue to water at stage 4 and report back to the board by Q4 so that we can maybe consider that for next year.
Staff?
We can try to do what we can with the data available, but we will have to determine to the extent we have the data available actually to do that full assessment. But that will be part of the reporting out.
I'm not sure whether we need the motion or not because you're seconding it. Well, in that case, we've got a motion. All in favor? Alrighty, that passes. Okay, we're down to new business. We had 2 very short items. One was just reporting back the recruitment process for committee members for PMAC closed on last Friday. I understand we didn't have enough applications so that the process is going to be continued. Could I hear from that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, because of we currently received not sufficient applications to actually initiate a PMAC, so we decided to extend the term at least for another 2 weeks, and we start some branding advertisement on it as well. Do some additional announcements.
Okay. There's no questions on that. Then the other item was an announcement from Director Tyers about webcams. Oh, that was you, Director Hiltz. All right.
Okay, thanks, Chair. There are new Drive BC webcams located at the top of the bypass. I was looking for information about the highway closures to the fire in Port Mellon, and there are now 3 webcams at the top of the bypass, which BC Transit or our transit drivers might find useful in the winter time. So that's news to me. I didn't even know. So there they are this morning. 3 wonderful webcams to tell you what the bypass is looking like.
After all that excitement, I think that finishes our agenda. Do we adjourn this part? And then, no, we don't adjourn. So next is public questions, which also isn't on the agenda, by the way. We need to get that template fixed. Press. Do we have any questions from the press?
What I can say there is that Trout Lake will be, it all depends on what we're allowed by to lower our EFN with, and how long we can keep it at that lower level. And that's the same with Great Creek. In the past, we used to run it when we got to stage 3. This year, stage 3, we might call it that early, that the creek might not be in a similar condition in terms of risk to drinking water as we used to have it, because that was mid-August. So we have to see what we can do there in the discussion with VCH, how much we can bring it forward. So it will really depend on the duration we can draw from those additional resources, as well as the duration we can, and the magnitude of a lower EFN, if any. How to rate the 3, but I think it's fair to say that Trout Lake would provide us with the least amount of additional water. And the other two, that really depends on how things play out.
I think we'll be taking some direction from staff on that, whether it's at the ministerial level that we go, or if we'd actually go to the staff level to see where we can be of the most benefit to move something forward.
So maybe thinking of it in terms of speeding up the process.
Yes.
Actually what
Yes. Yes.
And do we have any public questions? Yeah.
What I can say there is that reserves are not only intended to improve our water supply. Reserves are also intended to maintain our current water supply system, ECS management component. So it will always, the reserves only, the amount of reserves I think is publicly available and was presented in some recent reports earlier this year. But I think the reserves itself is not a good reflection of the money that's available, because a portion of that is to replace current assets. So it's a tricky question to address. What I can say is that the current funds are insufficient to support all the infrastructure upgrades currently under consideration. However, we are talking about we have options like an AEP, long-term borrowing. We continuously look for grant opportunities. So it's not a straightforward answer, but the current funds are insufficient to what we currently have in our reserves to fund the infrastructure upgrades currently on the table, while they have not been confirmed yet, because no confirmation has been even on Church Road. It is still not the only budget we have is to get a permit, not even to develop it.
Director Lee.
A couple of knowledgeable gentlemen left, but they asked me if I could ask the question on their behalf.
Great.
They said that the previous board had passed a motion to implement curbside recycling for B, D, and F, and they were wondering what happened to that motion. So I said I would ask that question.
You know, I vaguely remember that. No, that was a previous board. Yeah.
Based on that motion, we initiated the RFP as we did last year. So, and early this year, the board decided to only award curbside. So I'm not sure what the legal status currently is of that motion. Yeah.
Sophie.
Leaders. They have their water system. Most of the households have their own cistern, and they got a flow restrictor from the cistern to their house.
Okay, if that's it, I'm going to declare that we're going to move in camera, which I thought we were going to change to closed meeting, but we'll get there. That the public be excluded from attendance at the meeting in accordance with Section 91K of the Community Charter, negotiations and related discussion respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are at their preliminary stages and that, in the view of the council, could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held in public.